thank you for taking time out to be here tonight. I have to say I'm really impressed with the turnout. So there are going to be a lot of questions, which you expect. We want to encourage you to share those questions. What we're going to do tonight is we are going to do a presentation. We'll have a question and answer period, and then we will be doing tours, which I would strongly encourage that you participate in. I am Rodney Figueroa. I am the superintendent of schools. I am in my third month here in the district, and I am very impressed with the community, the staff, and our kids are amazing. The fact that we have this kind of turnout for this information session is great. So we are going to kind of tag team a little bit. Mr. Ron Olson, our Director of Business Services, is here with me. He and I will do the majority of the presentation. Mr. Jeremy Jackson, our high school principal, is also here, and he may be adding some background or some color to some of the things we're saying. When we get to the question and answer period, we do have some representatives from C.G. Schmidt and from PRA Engineering and from Baird Financial. So if you have questions during the question and answer period and we need some additional expertise, we do have those here on site. So again, I welcome and thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn this over to Ron to get this started.
All right, so the first question everybody usually asks for me is, what's this going to look like when I go into vote? And so the resolution that you see on the board is actually exactly what you'll see when you go into vote. It said, shall the following resolution be approved? And then there's going to be the statement in yes or no. And so there's a lot of legal intro into that. Shall the school district of Monroe Green County, Wisconsin be authorized to issue pursuant to Chapter 67 of the Wisconsin statutes, general obligation bonds in amount not to exceed $88 million for the public purpose of paying the cost of the school building and improvement, project consisting of acquisition of land and construction of a new high school, including a performing arts center and site improvements, removal of the current high school and site restoration, capital maintenance and mechanical system improvements at Abraham Lincoln Elementary, and the acquisition of furnishing, fixtures, and equipment. So what all does that mean? So basically, the question would be, if it's approved, the referendum, it allows the district to issue debt. What's the debt for? It's for $88 million to be paid back over 21 years. And what is the purpose of it? The purpose of it is a new high school on a new site. That confuses some people because a few years ago we had a different question that wasn't a new high school, new site, but it's a new high school on a new site, which means new career technical education classrooms, tech ed for those who were around a while ago, which would also include things like PACE and business areas as well. New athletic facilities, new performing arts, updated classrooms. It also includes making Abe Lincoln mechanicals up to the quality that we just did with our North Side and Parkside Elementaries. So Abe Lincoln, in the previous question that had been considered, that didn't go to the electorate, was potentially being considered to be closed. Abe Lincoln's going to remain open. We'll be making sure that that building's ready to operate for the next 20 years, just like we did with Parkside and North Side. We didn't just get here overnight. Some people asked us that. To be honest, they asked a question about a new high school back in 1996. So it's been a little while coming. But in 2016-17, we actually went out and solicited firms. We had a number of firms who offered to work with us to do a facility study. And so that facility study was completed in 2017. And we had a facilities group of staff and community members who came together to look at those results. And what quickly became apparent was the high school was the leading concern for the district. We had a number of issues that we knew we needed to address, and it rose to the top. The problem was the 2018 election was fast approaching, and they didn't feel that we had time to inform our community and to address it for 2018. So we had debt that was retiring, and we didn't want it to just drop off and go away. So you recall we did the question for Northside Mechanicals, to update the mechanical systems, I should say Parkside, to update the mechanical systems at Parkside Elementary. That was our newest elementary. We wanted to get that sound able to operate for the next 20 years. That was done in 2018. We move forward, we're heading toward 2020. The question at that time was going to be, should we renovate this into a 712 building, close Abe Lincoln, reconfigure all of our classes, and move forward with that? COVID happened spring of 2020. Recall when it first happened, the first few months when we left our houses, right? So the board said we're not going to be able to run a referendum in that environment. So in the spring of 2019, or I should say of 2021, we ran a question to do to Northside what we did to Parkside. Get all the mechanicals updated, really short, fast payback period, and have that building sound for the next 20 years to go. We then, in 2021, reconvened that facilities committee because we knew we still had to address the high school. It had been kind of pushed off a couple of times. And they said, you know, we've been hearing a lot of talk in the community. And there's a lot of people in the community who are still concerned about closing Abe Lincoln. They're really concerned about reconfiguring all of our grade levels into a whole different, scenario than what we currently operate in. We currently have K5s, a 6-8, and a 9-12. We would have had a 7-12 with a 4-6 and K3s, and they said people just aren't comfortable with that. They also said people were also a little alarmed about putting, the proposal was $86 million into renovating and fixing this building when they knew what some of the big concerns we had with this building were. And they were like, do we really want to put that much money into a building that we know we have water infiltration issues, we know we have some mold concerns, and we know we have foundation concerns? So they started pivoting and looking toward a new high school on a new site. And that's really what they coalesced around after a number of meetings, which then the board approved in the spring, which kind of brings us to this process for a November election. Kind of walked through some of those already. Has a new site been selected? Mr. Figueroa can take that one.
So as you may have heard, we just recently were able to get a piece of property under contract. And it is over by Northside Elementary School. It's a part of two parcels. One is 63 acres and the other one is larger. We looked at pretty much every parcel that surrounded the city, every parcel that would meet needs. So if you're not aware, the current site the high school sits on is 26 acres. So we have activities that happen throughout the city that we have to transport kids to because we don't have the facilities here for them to be able to compete, practice, and play for different things on our site. That was one issue with the site. The other issue is, as Ron alluded to, there's not a lot of places to grow, and there's questions about the foundation. So this site that we looked at over by Northside, it has, there's a few things that we found out after we started looking at it. It does drop off quite a bit as you go to Highway 11, but that part of the property is not going to be purchased by the school. So when we pulled up on the GIS and we went out there and looked at it, about 75% of the 77 plus acres we're looking at has elevation change of 20 feet or less. So that greatly changes the amount of groundwork that has to be done in preparation for the site. Now there's other things we still have to do. We still have to do agriculture impact study. There has to be a wetlands delineation. There's different things like that that have to do that we have to do for a building of this scope and size. But with that location, we're literally right on the edge of town. We have access to city utilities, so water, sewer. There's a major technology hub very close there, which is going to be helpful for the school district, which is one of the concerns we have here, just with the infrastructure here as far as the electrical supply.
One thing I wanted to make sure everyone is aware when we speak about it being under contract, that it doesn't mean we own it yet. It means we have the right to own it. It's contingent upon A, the referendum passing, and B, all those environmental studies that Mr. Figueroa just talked about have to be passed successfully. So the ground has to be, conducive. There has to be no concerns about wetlands, and all those other factors have to come into play before the sale would be final.
So the other thing with this campus would be you want to look into the future. So in the event that additions would have to be added, the planning would be done in a way that it would be done so that we wouldn't have the stress on the HVAC system we have now or any of the other internal or infrastructures that would be in place. So there would be adequate parking. We would be able to get buses off of streets. So there's a bunch of safety things that we could address. And speaking of safety, which we'll talk a little bit about later, you know, nobody ever wants to talk about a safety issue in your district, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to plan for some things like this to prevent that in some way. So I'm sure there'll be some questions about this later, but those are really the high points about the property. One other thing that I will mention, there are other future plans, long-range plans in the city for different road access on that property. So it's not just going to be off of 31st Street. So those are all things that we need to work out with the city yet, but those are already in their long-range planning. So we're going to be working with them and collaborating and keep a good partnership. So, Jeremy, you want to just, so Mr. Jeremy Jackson's our high school principal. He's going to, I'll let him add in here as we go, but, so new high school on a new site. So the cornerstone on the building is 1958. We have other additions. I'm not even sure, has it been 3 additions since that time?
I believe so.
So the last addition did not include upgrades to HVAC. We have classrooms that underneath the foundation of those classrooms are causing problems. We have water infiltration coming in through the floor. We have dirt coming in through the floor. We have wetness, dampness that is consistent. If you're fortunate enough to do the tours, hopefully you're going to go around, you're going to see the dehumidifiers. When you came in, yes, we have to have the barn fans because that's how we're circulating the air. Okay? What we're looking for in a new school is we want flexible classrooms so that students can collaborate and work the way they'd have to work in a work environment, learn from each other. We want to modernize our tech ed area, which we talked about. And just very briefly, the districts I was at previously, we did modernize our tech ed area, and that learning space is up to standards that you would have in any modern workplace. We have a capstone program in that district now that over 50% of those kids graduate with industry recognized certifications, and which I think would be a very good goal for us here. We have several programs that are going on with SOAR and Launch that are working toward that. If some of you are here that maybe participated in the capstone program from the early 2000s, you may realize the value of that experience. We'd be able to provide that in a newer place. The gym, auditorium for performances, parking, having enough parking, and having parking in good places. So we need ADA access. Nobody has to walk a half a mile to get somewhere. Energy efficiency, the HVAC system, it's important. Obviously, the systems that are out there now are much more efficient than they were even 10 years ago. So, and not running dehumidifiers, probably between 40 and 50 of them in the building right now.
Yeah, about 47, I think it is.
Yeah. And we have somewhere around 10 or 11 barn fans that are running nonstop.
One of those things that with the dehumidifiers, we don't need dehumidifiers, is that they run 24 hours a day, and we actually have a custodian when they're here going around to all the 47 different ones and dumping them because they need to be dumped at least twice a day, and they estimate 80 to 100 gallons of water is taken out of the air per day. And those barn fans run 24 hours a day as well. And that's, you know, I don't like saying the M word, right, but people have talked about the building having mold, right? We're trying to keep as much air flowing and moving through the building so that that doesn't happen. I'm not saying that hasn't happened in the past because it has, and we've remediated it and cleaned it up. But we need to keep that air moving so that doesn't happen. I love it when the weather turns like this because once it gets cooler, a little drier, then we're in a little better spot with that. Yesterday was a lot different story.
A little warmer, a little damper yesterday.
Yes. So the ability to serve our students now and in the future for many generations, this is something that would be considered a lifetime site. So when we go into the design phase of this, if we're fortunate enough to be able to do this, that's what we'll be looking at as we design. So there's just a few things up here from some schools that have done some different things. This would be a picture of the tech ed room, obviously no creek, commons areas, classrooms. Flexible learning spaces is a big deal. We do still have classrooms that are conducive to desks and rows. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we found that that's not always the best way for kids to learn. Being able to do project-based learning, hands-on learning, real-world learning, they need to be able to move around, they need to be able to talk, they need to be able to communicate. So that's what we want to do with the spaces. We want to bring them up. Wisconsin Dells also put in a culinary arts area for obvious reasons in the Dells. They have a great need for it. But these are all things that we can do for our students and for many generations of students.
Yeah, I think one of the focuses there is most of the, whether it be career tech and the tech ed area, whether it be the FACE areas, really the focus is preparing students for a career or a job, right? So our current FACE, home ec space, looks very much like a traditional home kitchens, and there's even some sewing spaces in there. That's a far cry from preparing someone, you know, on industry grade equipment to prepare them to go out and work in that, or go to additional schooling in that area.
Yeah, there's 5 home kitchens in there, and then, not that that's not valuable, right? We still need to teach students how to do things in their own home, but we also want to prepare them for careers and jobs that they might have after high school. So that's something a little bit more valuable, and that's what we're really trying to do with the programming. And a question I get a lot of times is, what do you mean the rooms are too small? There was way more students here 20 years ago, and I was here 20 years ago, and you're right, there were way more students, but education is different now, okay? We want to have teachers making lessons that are much more innovative and collaborative and getting kids up and moving around the room and working in groups and problem solving and doing some real world type of stuff, because believe it or not, students are asking questions like, why do I have to do this, right? So we're trying to answer that question with, this is how you would do it in the real world or in a job, and we need space to move kids out and about on that. And it's not as much, now there is still some lecture from teachers, of course, but it's not as much of that. And in some of the rooms that you'll see or remember, there's just not room to do that.
So I'm just going to reference back to my previous district. So we did build a career and technical education training facility for our students. I'm going to focus on agriculture, for example, because we were in the ag rooms yesterday, and it's an area of the building that the foundation is not sound, and parts of those walls are pulling away from the building, and part of the foundation is sinking. And if you go outside and look at the greenhouse, you can see that there's some things there, and it's not just a matter of the bricks weren't laid in right. It's foundational. But what we had in my previous district is we had a 30 by 24 agriculture classroom, and we were a pretty big agriculture area. That's big cranberries over there in the middle of the state. Well, you know what? Monroe's a pretty big agriculture area, isn't it? And we're pretty much a 1958 agriculture area that was designed. The spaces are small. We were in the small animal lab, and it's small. The greenhouse has limitations. There's foundational problems.
And that actually would have been in probably the 90s edition, but it was still built to be a much smaller
It was that new.
space, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
One of the things with that greenhouse too, I mean, you'll notice, right, the corner of it separating and sliding, but also look, I mean, I don't know the reason, right, but something underneath that part of the school is moving. Because if you look at the fence that's next to the concession stand in the football field, that fence was straight, and now it's this way towards the concession stand. So something is moving there. I don't know why, but it's more than just wear and tear.
So just tie this up so we can move on from that. But so they went from that 30 by 24 classroom, they went to a classroom about 60 by 30 with running water and a classroom lab, collaborative spaces. They went to a large and small animal lab where they could actually have steers, chickens, dogs, cats, whatever type of livestock you wanted in. They brought pigs into, which I discouraged them because pig manure is a tough deal in town when you got to vent it. But they could bring them in, they could do the shows, they could do the vet sciences, they could do all those things, and they added an animal processing area. So they were actually teaching kids how to butcher animals. And then the other lab we added was agriculture mechanics. And so they could work on tractors. They had a small engine, so kids were bringing in their own projects. And it was all hands-on, tooling well lit, ventilated, had the right drains. Everything was done the way it needed to be done. Our agriculture program the classes were jam-packed, and over half of our certifications came through ag certifications. So those opportunities exist. Current building concerns, you know, Jeremy touched on a few of these already, and so did Ron. Our custodial team works really hard to not have mold in the schools. We had an instance this summer where one of the chillers went out over the weekend, hot and humid, came back in, and we ended up having to test some substance that we found to make sure it wasn't mold. We didn't have kids in the building at that time. We had them off for summer school. We tested it, it was okay. Custodial team, we got it all cleaned up. But they run the fans to circulate the air. They're constantly watching, looking, cleaning, wiping, scrubbing, drying, trying to get things done to keep the moisture down so that we don't have these issues. Foundation issues, when you talk about water, movement of water, if you saw the drain tiles along the front of the building, there's been issues probably for years where the water was getting under the foundation of the building, which was actually moving the ground under the building, which is causing a lot of the problems we're having right now. It's entering the building when we get a heavy storm in the basement. There's water that comes up through the floor, comes in through the cracks. There's tunnels that they put in for the old HVAC systems that we're in that hold water. And to vacate that water is not as simple as just letting it dry out because there's nowhere for it to go. So it's a lot. The parking lot obviously is going to get flooded because we're trying to push all the water away from the roof of the building. So that it's the lesser of two evils. Jeremy, anything for that?
No, and the only other thing is that you'll notice is walking around the building, if you look up, right, there's many stained ceiling tiles, and yes, we could change them, right, and we do change them, but then they get stained again, and people say, well, just fix those leaks. Well, this building, the roof is kind of an inset roof with rubber membrane with rocks on top of it, so trying to find where that leak is has been really tough, and the maintenance staff over the years has done an amazing job doing that. But it's really hard to track it down. And when you track one down, then there's another one, and they're just kind of all over the place. And it would be a massive deal to try to figure that out. And it doesn't just leak. As you all know, water takes the path of least resistance, right? So it's running down beams and going all over the place. So trying to find those is really hard. Another thing I want to say about the floor this summer when that happened, we had that, if y'all remember when we had that 12 inches of rain or whatever it was that day, our main hallway, the front hallway there, spots came up through the floor, and it always does every year, and they wax it, make it look super good, and then all of a sudden these brown spots come up, and we don't know what it is. Well, during that rain, they came up, and it was like a gooey molasses-like substance, and it was all down the entire front hallway and in the classrooms too. Now, we got it cleaned up, but again, that shouldn't be happening. I don't know if it's mold or not, but that shouldn't be happening in any building. You certainly wouldn't want it in your home, but that was happening, that's happening in this building.
Yes, it is not being mold, so that was the good news.
Yes. Mechanical systems, we've touched on the HVAC. The system is not adequate for the square footage that we have. There's no air conditioning in the gyms or the tech ed spaces. You know, electrical and data wiring, they need updates, and that's expensive. Plumbing fixtures are old and have to be replaced. Some of them are inlaid into the concrete, which isn't as simple as just taking something out and repairing it. It's got to be busted out. And there's no sprinkler system for the fire system. So some of the larger maintenance needs, Jeremy touched on the roofs. It's not just a roof, it's multiple roofs with different years. And finding out where the water intrusions are coming in when it's raining. They hunt those down and they do a pretty good job of finding them, but after you find those, something else comes up because the roofs are at the point where they need to be replaced. Parking lots, the tennis courts, it sounds like they maybe were on a maintenance schedule or maybe could have been replaced a few years ago.
Yeah, those who recall, our tennis team right now are doing great numbers, great program. A few years ago, the numbers were down. There was a question of, do we replace the tennis courts? Because the tennis courts had basically exceeded their life and were at the point where they said, if you want to keep going with these, you got to strip them off and rebuild them, and that means a whole new foundation and everything for them. We've been making it go with crack filling them and trying to get them operational. Our JV team basically practices on them and sometimes has some events on them. All of our varsity goes and actually plays on all the city courts.
So concerns about the bathrooms, they're outdated. They don't have the code required spaces that you would need in a modern bathroom. They're grandfathered in the way they are. The locker rooms are in the basement, so you have to go downstairs. There's no access to them, so they're not ADA accessible. The boys, correct. Ventilation in the locker rooms. So we were working on a video yesterday. Sorry, I'm to laugh. We walked down there, and we'll be able to get the video up, and you can see it, but you won't be able to smell it. So, but that's the ventilation issues one of the issues that we're dealing with in those locker areas. So, and then of course showers. It has like the dozen or 16 spigots on the wall, and you're literally shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip taking a shower.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues with, when we talk about students today, right? Students today aren't necessarily like they were when we went to school or even before that, right? And they have an expectation of some privacy and personal space, right? And our bathrooms and our locker rooms certainly aren't conducive to personal space. We have a lot of students who choose not to shower. And they go throughout their day not showering. They may be playing football or wrestling or whatever the event may be and not showering because they're not real comfortable with the locker room situations that we have.
One thing I think is important to say that you mentioned already, the foundation sinking and moving and shifting. Keeping this building secure and safe, keeping the doors locked is an issue. Right now, our front door, I tell every student, every staff, once you go out the door, pull it shut, because it will not shut on its own. And that's because when it gets humid, it swells and moves. And that's not the only door about the building. We spend a lot of our day going around the building, making sure the building is secure, so someone can't just walk in, like some of these places that things have happened, unfortunately. So, and that's not because, we just gotta adjust a little something on the trim or anything like that. It's because the building swells or shifts, or so does the door frame. So we gotta, like I said, our maintenance staff over the years has done a really good job trying to fix them and making adjustments, but they're constantly doing it because we don't know when a door will stick open. So that's another thing, another concern.
So, and that, it's a good segue into current concerns, which we kind of talked about with security. I mean, the ideal situation is when we have visitors, they pass through one door, go through the office. Right now, that's not possible the way that things are configured. And the camera system needs to be upgraded in the high school for security reasons too. So, classroom and lab spaces, generally not designed for collaboration. They need better electrical. We want to be able to have parents or kids be able to break out and do their projects and work and still be supervised without having to send them places where there's no supervision. So our science labs, career and tech ed, family and consumer ed, we kind of touched on these already. But in order to meet the needs of current needed skills in the workforce, these areas need to be addressed.
So I got this slide because Fig wasn't here when we did it. After we had looked at the options of, were we interested in either continuing with the 712, were we interested in, a 912 update to this building and keeping Abe Lincoln or a new school on a new site, we surveyed the community about the 712, I'm trying to think if it was 712 or the 912. I believe the 712 versus the 912 option with the new site. 63% of the community came back in January and said, yes, we want to move forward with a new building on a new site, and we would support that. So another question comes, what happens to this site if we're fortunate enough to have a successful referendum and we have a new building on the way? Basically, it'll take 3 years to get to a new facility. There'll be a year of design that'll take us into next year. And then starting either next fall or the spring of 2024, construction would begin with completion of a new high school in the fall of 2025. So we have some time to basically study. At a minimum, the question has dollars in there to return this site, demolish this site, and return it to a green space, at a minimum. However, if during the course of those 3 years, if we find some community partners who have an interest in some of the bigger spaces, you would have to tack on an HVAC system to the PAC or an HVAC system onto the gyms. If some of those community partners who use those kinds of spaces would show some interest in them, we could explore those possibilities. There's talk about if it does go to a green space, what does that mean? Certainly the city has some interest in how we might utilize that or what some of their considerations could be. We may be able to put it back into lots and put it back onto the tax roll. I've had community members who are very forward-thinking, who came to me and said, you just went through this whole process of trying to find land. Maybe you should hold on to it, so if you have to address the middle school or one of the elementaries 20, 30 years from now, you're not going through this process again. So all those considerations would be thought and talked through by the Board of Education during those 3 years if we are fortunate enough to do that process. What will it cost? So as you can see, this is our levy rate over the last few years. It's been dropping pretty steadily here. This is the black portion is what is our operating costs, our operating levy. The red number is what is our debt service. You can see we have 2 years of the north side to still be paid for, and then we're actually going to be debt free. So if we passed the high school referendum, obviously we have it laddered so it kicks in a little more expensive after that expires, and we have those payments consistent over those years. The cost of the referendum for the building itself is $1.99 per thousand. So what's that mean? If you have a $100,000 home, it's going to be $199. 200,000, you're going to be $400. So that is the cost of the debt service. The reality, as you can see, is we're going to be getting an additional $1 million of state aid in the coming school year, which is going to significantly reduce our operating levy. We also have a TIF district. So the west side of Monroe, they had a TIF district 20 years ago that basically was to put infrastructure into the city, and then that valuation gets capped for the school district until that TIF district ends. That TIF district went away. It's the TIF district that basically includes the new Pick and Save building. So now we finally get to recognize that valuation growth. And so that's also going to lower our tax levy for the school district. So what we're seeing is after that reduction, when you add the $1.99, we're looking at no more than a 50-cent per thousand increase from what it currently is. We're actually looking like we'll probably be less than that. Where does that put us? It puts us less than where it was just 2 years ago, as far as what our levy rate is. And so the impact will be far less because of some of those other factors that are coming into play. But I don't want to deceive people. The cost of the school itself and the debt service is that $1.99. Which is what that says. And to summarize some of those, our levy rate right now is 60 cents per thousand, lower than it has been at any time in the last 30 years. I say 30 years because that's how far I can track back. Anybody who's been in this business knows that in the 80s and the 70s, school levy rates were much higher than they were after the revenue limit came in. So it's got to be much longer than that. I just can't say how much longer than that. It's fallen significantly over those last 5 years. As you saw, we're going to get that extra $1 million in state aid coming up this coming year. That's going to help offset that. And so that $1.99, we're going to say is going to be no more than 50 cents. My latest projections, I think, would say closer to 32. But we will see after the aid gets finalized in October, as well as the levy gets finalized in October, as to what that would be. So why now? Obviously, we have a number of issues with our existing high school that are going to require a large investment. And so whether we put it into this building, which was considered by the facilities committee, or look at putting it to new building, they thought that putting dollars into a new building made a lot more sense than putting a significant amount of dollars into this building. The costs are only going to continue to increase. Our current inflation costs are high, which are worrisome. We feel that fortunately we're not actually going to be going out to bid probably until the fall of 2023 or spring of 2024, so we're hoping that's going to moderate a little bit before then and bring some of those down. But we have factored in costs for inflation. The one good thing about interest rates going up a little bit is we might get some short-term cash flow interest while we're building it. We just talked about interest rates. Interest rates are on the rise. Barrett has built in costing so that we have the increases in interest rates factored into the dollars that we just talked about, the cost of this project. We will go out when the interest rates are at the best time for us. You can do a short-term bond anticipation note to buy yourself some time until the market looks a little better for you before you lock in for 21 years to come. You always have a chance to do your bonding at some point later in the future also, if you get a better rate that comes down the road. But in the grand scheme of things, over the 40 years, even though interest rates are going up and are much more than they were like 4 or 5 years ago, we're still at a relatively low interest rate if you look at it over 20 to 40 year time frame. Our current debt is expiring, so we're basically going to be debt free. We will be debt free in 2 years. And as that debt expires, it helps offset the cost of the new high school. I think the other thing that comes into play is all of our buildings are aging. Our newest building is Parkside Elementary, built in the late 1980s. We have, Abe Lincoln in the 1970s, Northside in the 60s, this building built in the 50s, the original part of the middle school built in the 1930s. If we wait and try and just buy time with this building, if we put another $30, $40 million into this building to try and buy ourselves 20 years, that may or may not be a big enough number. I think it's a little bigger number than that as you look at that. But when we get out 20 years, you're going to have 5 buildings in this community, all over 50 years old, basically 50 to 100 years old at that point in time. This community cannot afford to address 5 buildings at the same time. We have to get a foundation in a building that is solid that we can build around, so that 20 years down the road, if we have to start looking at our 3 elementaries or the middle school, we at least have one sound building that we can work off of. If we delay another 20 years, we're going to be in a tough place for our community. I guess you hit all 3 of those schools. I was talking that much. Go ahead.
So where we're at right now, so we've identified the property, so people have an idea if this passes where the location of the high school would be. So we talked about this a little bit. So we have an agreed purchase agreement. We'll have to do a survey. The board will have to get together, and they'll have to do a meeting of electors to finalize that. And then, of course, there's required government investigations, which would be the wetlands delineation and the agriculture impact study, things like that. And then, of course, zoning, and then conversations with the city about how we're going to tap into city utilities, and then the annexing possibly of additional properties over that side to take the city out further. So those are all things that need to get done. In the meantime, while those things are happening, we're going to be looking at the design, and like we had talked about before, we don't just want to design it for what the needs are now. We want to design this in a way that it's flexible and it's going to serve the district literally forever.
So then with that, you'll have your construction and site documents would begin in the fall of 2023, spring of 2024. We would issue that debt whenever it's optimal. We would address any emergency needs with this building as they come up, because we're obviously going to be living in this building for at least another 3 years. And then the new high school would open in the fall of 2025.
So next step, if the referendum fails. So the Board of Education has to go back and reevaluate the process. As was shared earlier in the survey early this year, the community at 63% supported a new building on a new site. So the issue that we have, and hopefully you have a better feel of that even before the tour now, is that the needs that the school have don't go away. So these needs are consistent, they're relevant, and they need to be addressed. So we would need to determine at that point, what the community's choice would be as far as going forward. And that's really about all we can say at this point.
Yeah, and we understand that this is this is a big ask of our community. We understand that with inflation and interest rates right now, it's a little alarming to some people. But on the flip side, there's districts who went out last year when it seemed to be the ideal situation, who this year are now trying to build while that's all at the head of it, and they're struggling to get that done. So time evolves, and this process is going to evolve over the next 2-3 years. And so we hope that when we get to doing some of our actual construction, we'll be in a little better place. And again, the interest rates, although it's not great for people's retirement accounts, and I understand that, and the inflation for paying for gas and groceries is hitting people. At some point in time, we have to invest in this school, in meaning this high school, whether it's here or a new high school, and the needs aren't going away. So this is the question again. Those of you who like technology, I'm not a great technology user, you can come up here, scan this. This will take you to the link to the district website with all kinds of referendum information there. You can go to monroeschools.com. There will be another session on October 11th. We may be also looking at a Saturday in October as well, because we've heard a few people who thought that a Saturday might work better for them. And so we appreciate your time, and we'll